Hi there, and welcome to the latest episode of Off the Data Provided. I am, of course, your host, Dr. Marcus C. Shepard. On today's episode, we will talk about a new Wire article entitled AI Relationships Are on the Rise. A Divorce Boom Could Be Next. Through this discussion, we'll revisit concepts that include investment, emotional closeness, support, trust, and two of Duck's 5-stage model of relational breakdowns with intrapsychic phase and didactic breakdown. Also, stay tuned for Ask Dr. Shepard at the end of the podcast, where I will, of course, give advice on how to deal with your family during the Thanksgiving holiday. Of course, if you want to submit an Ask Dr. Shepard, feel free to email me at offthedataprovided@gmail.com. That is offthedataprovided@gmail.com. So when we delve into this article on AI relationships are on the rise and a divorce boom could be next, the article starts off talking with Rebecca Palmer, who's a divorce attorney, who says that spouses who have unmet emotional needs are the most vulnerable to influences and behavior of AI, particularly if a marriage is struggling. So Rebecca talks about how chatbots are allegedly dependable, right? Can provide emotional support and rarely pick fights with you. Now, I say, of course, allegedly dependable because if you don't have a connection to the internet or the cloud service is down, as a bunch of people experienced a few weeks ago, you probably are not going to have access to your quote-unquote chatbot. Now, to be transparent, I have not used AI. I have not used chatbots. So I am not actually personally familiar with how they work. So I am doing a lot of this work based on research, based on other people's accounts, and of course, my own political views on AI. I think if you've been following the podcast, you probably are aware that I am not a fan of AI. I do not think that the environmental impact, especially on communities of color, more particularly Black communities, where a lot of these AI databases are, is not worth or justifies the usage of it to make pictures, to create companions. I do, as I have said, say that AI could potentially in the future, depending on if they are able to remedy a lot of these health issues that surround it and resource issues, right? It using up a lot of electricity, it using up a lot of water in these different places, that I could see it being used to help foster skills building. But to see that companionship is on the rise and people are kind of just like, it is what it is, I am totally against it. So just a little PSA for that. But delving back into the article, one example mentioned is from actually a Reddit user who decided to end her marriage of 14 years after discovering that her husband was in a relationship with a woman that he called, quote unquote, sexy Latina baby girl. And in reality, this person or companion, I would say, was an AI app that was actually designed to mimic an underage girl. This woman also found out that her husband was spending thousands of dollars related to this AI app. Another example that comes in the Wire article actually comes from a June article from their website, where a woman decided to end her relationship with her human partner because they both agreed that it felt as if she was cheating on him with her AI companion. So as chatbot romances seemingly become more commonplace, they're going to cause lasting rifts in offline relationships, I would argue. And it's clear that AI affairs might become a new norm for grounds for divorce and or couples therapy. So roughly 60% of singles actually say that AI relationships are considered a form of cheating, according to two recent surveys, one by the Indiana University's Kinsey Institute and another by Clarity Check. And what's fascinating is Palmer states that the law is still developing alongside these experiences, but some people think of it as a true relationship and sometimes better than one with a person. Palmer is, of course, as I said, a divorce attorney who's based in Orlando, and she has worked with spouses who have actually gone through divorces or are going through divorces due to partners cheating with AI. So this article, of course, delves more into the legal ramifications, and I do think it's important to mention those, and we'll talk about those before we delve into the communication theory and how I see this. And so, what we see is that more and more courts are probably going to see clients cite emotional bonds with AI companions as reasons for marital strains or disillusion, therefore divorce. And so the legal classification of AI still varies state to state due to matters of family law. And Palmer adds that the laws classifying AI as third parties or not a person are fast approaching, especially in states like California. Palmer says that she doesn't anticipate that courts will legally recognize AI companionship as people. There are, of course, countless debates around AI personhood, and that is still going to loom, I think, as the technology changes. And we see that happening month to month, day by day, as you continue to input your data. The AI is using that data and spitting other things out, right? Trying to become more quote unquote human-like. So AI affairs clearly pose an interesting question for both interpersonal communication, relationships, as well as legality. So we know, for instance, that in 16 states here in the United States of America, it is actually illegal to cheat on your spouse, and 13 of these states classify this as a misdemeanor. Doing a little research around this, I actually found out that Wisconsin, a state I grew up in for a part of my life, is actually sees it as adultery. It can be a felony charge, also punishable up to 5 years in jail and or up to $10,000. We know additionally, when it comes to legality, that AI enters into potentially divorce proceedings. It could enter into divorce proceedings over the misuse of money or finances, also known legally as the dissipation of assets. And so in a community property state like Texas, both parties have a right to the money accumulated during the marriage. And if a partner, like the woman from Reddit that the article mentions, was to undercover hidden payments to an AI companion, this could be a huge issue and clearly a grounds for divorce. Also, when it comes to custody battles, Palmer states, quote, that it is conceivable and likely that they would question the parent's judgment because they're having intimate discussions with a chatbot, which brings into question how they are spending time with their child. Another lawyer, a family law attorney, Elizabeth Yang, also says that this is just the start as AI, quote, continues to improve, becoming more realistic, compassionate, and empathetic. More and more people in unhappy marriages who are lonely are going to seek love with a bot. So Yang anticipates that we'll see an increase in divorce rates in the coming years as people turn to AI for companionship. Yang states that we'll probably see an increased rate of divorce filings. When COVID happened a few years ago, taking a break, COVID is still here, still happening, right? But the increase in divorces was significant. We probably saw 3 times the amount of divorces that were filed around 2020 to 2022. After 2022, once things got back to normal, divorce rates were back down, but it will probably go back up. And what's fascinating about that, especially as the Wire article highlights, is that in the UK, we're already seeing this happen. So there is a data collection service known as Divorce Online, and that platform claims that there's been an increase in divorce applications over the past year, where clients have stated that apps like Amia and Replica have created quote-unquote emotional and romantic attachments. Now, as I've said before, I'm not familiar with any of these AI platforms. I do not use them. I am against them. I don't think that they are right. As I said a few minutes ago, I can potentially see some justification in the future when we figure out the environmental impacts of AI, right? Making sure that it is carbon neutral, that is not polluting the air, so on and so forth. But we clearly are not there and probably will not be there for some time. What's also interesting, as Palmer states towards the end of the article, is that what is happening now, she's seen before. And This is kind of what happened with Web 2.0, right? We talk about Web 2.0 as kind of the rise of social media. I would probably argue Web 3.0 is this rise and hopefully fall, right? I'm knocking on wood if you can hear that, of AI. And so Palmer states, quote, that it could be that a partner connected with someone that they haven't seen in years, or that there is just a true need to have communication. It is a rare case anywhere where social media is not involved when she's talking about regarding divorces. AI, she believes, is the natural evolution of that. And so what she says, quote, is what I'm finding is AI is turning into exactly that. So the article, as I've kind of ran through the major beats and points of, highlights that clearly more and more people are using AI. We can see AI potentially leading to emotional affairs. I can see, maybe if I had a crystal ball, that in the future it could maybe even lead to physical affairs if one has an AI bot that they are maybe seeing or sleeping with on the side. We already know that there are lifelike kind of figures that people can use for their pleasure. And as AI is evolving, we're clearly going to see people putting AI into these beings so that they can move, that they can be autonomous, that they can be used. And so I can see that also leading to physical affairs, potentially, depending on how you and your partner define that. But clearly in the UK, for example, we're already seeing documented cases of emotional and romantic attachment being grounds for divorce, as Yang has highlighted, the family attorney, as well as how Palmer has identified, a divorce attorney, that they are starting to see these cases, right, where individuals are getting into deep, emotionally invested situations with these AI companions, and this is leading them to detach from relationships, to not be as invested in these relationships, to maybe find that somewhere else. So they're unhappy, and instead of potentially seeking it with an actual physical person, maybe they believe that this is a more ethical way to get their needs met because they don't maybe see it as cheating. But I think it all depends on how you and your partner define that. So, of course, the concept meta communication about communication and what communication acts mean and stand for, is going to come in here. So, what are we defining as cheating? Is just cheating involve an AI app? Does cheating involve, as we've talked about earlier on the podcast, engagements of flirting on social media, liking a bunch of pictures of somebody, maybe being in their DMs, sending them sexually explicit photos? On the flip side, what does that mean with a chat bot if they're sending you potentially sexually explicit images that they've created because you've paid for them? In the example of the Reddit user that is getting a divorce after 14 years because her husband was having an affair with this quote unquote sexy Latina baby girl AI app that was mimicking an underage girl and was sending images and pictures, right? That's cheating. That's also, is it pedophilia, right? How do people define that, right? The AI is entering into the space. So clearly, legally, there needs to be things that are coming about. And as was highlighted in the article, there are laws coming, quote unquote, online to engage with it. But also when I think about interpersonal communication theory, we have to also figure out, well, what do these things mean for these concepts? How do these concepts stretch? How do these concepts change? And so as I mentioned before, right, we're going to revisit investment, emotional closeness, trust, and support, and thinking about it through this AI lens. So investment, as we've talked about before, is what you expect to get out as well as to put in to a relationship. So it's your time, your feelings, your energies, your thoughts. Every relationship has a level of investment. And so when I think about these AI potentially cheating relationships, there's clearly an investment. You're investing your time typing in or voice messaging in, or I guess calling them. As I said before, I have no personal experience with these apps, but you are clearly investing time. You're also investing money, right? Some of these apps have features that you have to pay for, and as highlighted by the Reddit woman's experience, her husband was paying for things. Emotional closeness is, of course, through dialogue and self-disclosure as well as shared activities. So oftentimes with these chatbots, you are doing the emotional closeness, right? You're disclosing, you are sharing things, and the chatbot, will respond with what they think you want to hear. Doesn't mean that's actually how they respond because they're not sentient. So what's really going on here, right? Trust, not betraying your confidence and doing what you say you will do. So you're not betraying the AI's confidence, right? But are they betraying yours in those terms and conditions? They're collecting your data to use and sell. And as the article mentioned, some spouses have shared personal financial details, social security numbers. You're not breaching the trust of the AI, but the AI is definitely breaching your trust. And if you are in a marriage, as this article is looking at, right, divorces in particular, you are also breaking the trust and vow that you made to your partner. And then, of course, support we know is both verbal and nonverbal. So clearly this chat bot is giving you the support that you want because it wants you to stay on. It wants you to keep giving you the information so that it can use that information to make itself seem more lifelike and human. So it wants to support you however you can. And of course, you feel some support because you're able to vet to this chat bot. But is it true support if you're unable to pay? If you can't make your monthly payment, if you can't provide data that it wants, is it really going to support you? I think these are important things to think about if you are in an AI companionship or want to be in one, which I would wholly caution against, or honestly, not even caution against, tell you not to do. And so we see this, right? You're using your investment with this chatbot instead of with your partner. You're getting emotionally close with this chatbot instead of your partner. Now you're withholding information from your partner that you're telling this chatbot. You are trusting this chatbot. You're doing these things, and probably, as different examples in the Wire article highlight, aren't being transparent with your partner about these things, right? So now you're betraying the trust of your partner. And of course, you're not maybe supporting your partner in the way that they want to be supported because you are doing that with the chatbot. So of course, that is kind of breaking it down to those lenses. Those are kind of the friendship formula, as I state in my own work. But of course, any interpersonal relationship is going to require these ingredients. You're going to need to invest. You're going to need emotional closeness. You're going to need support, and you're going to need trust. And when we think about divorce and we think about deterioration of a relationship, it brings me back to Duck's 5 stages, right, of a relational breakdown, and especially the first 2, right, the intrapsychic phase as well as the didactic breakdown. So the intrapsychic phase, just a reminder, is when we focus on perceived declines in closeness, intimate communication, or lapses in joint activity or acts of consideration. So inside of us, we are feeling these things. We're not necessarily sharing them with our partner. And you might then, in turn, be sharing it with the chatbot. Maybe you feel as if your partner has pulled away and you're looking for that emotional closeness, so you go to the chatbot. Okay. And because you've gone to that chatbot, that might bring down the didactic breakdown, where this occurs when romantic partners gradually stop engaging their established patterns, understandings, and routines that make up their relational culture. So if partners don't talk about or choose to deny these problems, they are experiencing this phase, right? We're not going to talk about it. I'm just going to pull away. I am going to invest my time. I'm going to self-disclose with this chatbot. And conversely, for the partner who you've pulled away from, who you are doing all these things with this chatbot, they're left feeling maybe isolated. And hopefully, right, they're not conflict averse. And so they confront you about it. But if you're not being transparent, if you're not being honest about what you've done and why you've done it, this creates a really difficult space, and potentially some irreconcilable differences will occur, right? And this is where, of course, the divorce rate and article come from. So I'm not shocked or surprised when I'm hearing from this article, particularly these lawyers who are on the ground having this experience with different couples who are struggling with AI companionship entering into their relationship, and therefore potentially putting them in the intrapsychic and or didactic breakdown phase. And if they're unwilling to work through this and have some transparent conversations, I can see this leading to divorces, as they've highlighted. So I think it is rather unfortunate that this technology that some have argued is designed to bring us closer together, we continue to see more and more and more examples of how it continues to further isolate us, where you would rely on your community of people. Maybe you're experiencing some issues in your relationship. Before AI, before even a lot of social media usage, you would rely on your community of people around you. Talk to them. They would hopefully help you with that issue and help you go back to your partner or work with your partner around issues of maybe lack of emotional closeness or maybe some intimacy issues. Of course, we know in the history of marriage, right? And I think marriage has strayed from a lot of its maybe biblical as well as institutional understandings was, a union of two people and their communities. And so we see, especially in the United States of America, that oftentimes the union of these two different communities usually doesn't actually happen until the wedding, and that's usually it. Where in other cultures, in other collectivist cultures, I should say, especially, the wedding is used as a union, that these people are here to support and stand with you. And when you do go through difficult times, you're supposed to fall back on them. That's what it's supposed to be. But we're seeing as technology has infiltrated and taken a lot of the communal work away from us, right? We're becoming more isolated. We're becoming way more individualistic. We're losing these interpersonal relationships, these interpersonal ties. And so I would caution against using this technology. I think if you already feel isolated, this technology is going to make you feel more isolated. And so even if you're conflict averse, you need to get in the ring, as I always tell people. Because if you don't get in the ring, especially when it comes to conflict, right? Whatever the conflict is, you don't feel as if your partner is showing up for you in the way that you want. You have date nights and you feel like your partner is always on the phone, whatever it is. If you don't tell your partner this and tell them how it makes you feel and give them the opportunity to change, you are doing a disservice to your relationship and a disservice even to yourself, because you deserve better. You don't deserve to be in that partnership potentially, but you also deserve to give that person the right to make amends and to make changes, right? Humanity, we're fallible. We come up short. But if we don't tell someone that they're coming up short and instead just hold it against them, maybe now have an AI partnership or cheat on them with somebody else, that's not fair. That's not ethical. That's not effective. And as I said before, some people might view these AI companions as more of an ethical way to get their needs met. But for me, the most ethical way, right? Maybe it's the most effective way to do that, right? But the most ethical way is to confront your partner, to talk about it, and to work through those things. And if you're unable to work through those things, then that's okay. Maybe you're not meant long term. And that's okay. We evolve. We're always changing. And so maybe when you and this person got together, you were a great match. But now 10 or 14 years in, like the Reddit user, you're not a good match anymore. And it's okay for that to happen. But if you don't actually give it a fair shot or a try by allowing some grace and giving them the opportunity to change, then it's not okay. Right? Of course, there are instances where something happens and it's not okay at all, and you don't need to or should give someone the opportunity to change. Right? I'm thinking about domestic abuse or domestic violence. Of course, that happens, right? Go your own way. I totally support that. But things is, a slow decline of an investment or a slow decline of self-disclosure, right? Those are things you can bring up to your partner and hopefully fix. Maybe they felt like they were boring you with what they were saying. Maybe they felt like you weren't also self-disclosing when they were. So they felt like they were on an island by themselves, and nobody wants to feel that way. But having those difficult talks can actually bring you closer and more together. So that's my 2 cents on that Wire article. Of course, I'll end it by reiterating my stance that I do not think you should engage in AI companionship at all. And if you are feeling alone and isolated, there are better routes to hopefully foster and build communities than talking to an algorithm. And so that brings us to our Ask Dr. Shepherd for the day. So our Ask Dr. Shepherd comes from actually one of my current students and goes as follows. Hey, Dr. Shepherd, I'm currently taking your interpersonal communication class, and I have to say that I'm loving it. With that said, as we approach the Thanksgiving break, I wanted to ask for some guidance on how to maneuver time with my family. I have a tense relationship with one of my siblings, and since we will all be coming home for the holidays, I do not want that to overshadow my time with my family, my relatives, and parents, as well as other siblings. Somehow, though, when we all get together, my sister and I seem to always go at it, and it sours the mood. Any suggestions would truly be helpful as I'm trying to be more ethical and effective with my communication, as you harp on in our class. So thank you for that, right? I left their name out just because I don't think it's appropriate, or, we don't really need to know who these people are. So what I always find fascinating, interesting, what I have learned even from my students, I'm always so thankful, and I tell people about this, is oftentimes we've been taught as a society that certain behavior, even if it's done by a family member, should be overlooked. Where if it was done by a friend or a romantic interest or a coworker, it wouldn't be overlooked. And so I've wrestled with that, and I think I've come to an agreement, especially with my students, that just because we share blood or we are related in some type of way, that if you are doing something that I wouldn't tolerate from other people, I shouldn't tolerate it from you just because we're family. So there's that one caveat. So when it comes to your sister, you didn't delve much into detail about what the issue is. It just seems like you guys get your feathers ruffled with each other. So maybe you both press each other's buttons. So I would take a step back and figure out, well, what does my sister say or do that gets under my skin or gets under my nerves, right? Let's figure what that is and figure out why it does. Because we ultimately give power to people to ruffle our feathers. And so perfect example is I had a phone call with a relative this past weekend who I hadn't talked to in several years. And they were saying things to me that I think were designed to ruffle my feathers. But because we're not close, I don't envision them as my family, right? My chosen family, for instance. What they said just fell right off, right? It hit me like water on a waterproof jacket, right? It just fell right off, right? It didn't land, it didn't resonate maybe in the way that they thought it would, because I wasn't allowing them to have that power. They don't actually know me, right? And so they were making assumptions, right? I probably was making assumptions as well, right? But I don't know that person. So their digs or attacks that they were trying to say or land didn't land on me. So I would take a step back and figure out, well, what does my sister say that gets me riled up? And figure out, well, why does it get me riled up? And figure out, is there a way mentally, as we've talked about with emotional work, to maneuver that conversation or those situations where it doesn't really get under your skin? So that's another thing to think about. A third thing to think about is, as you said, you don't want it to sour the mood. You might talk to your sister before and say, hey, I know that when we usually get around each other, especially during the holidays, things can get tense, and it has soured the mood a few times before. I don't want that to happen. Is there some things that maybe I've done or have said or do say that rile you up, right? So I can avoid those things, right? Because you've hopefully have thought about those, right? As I say, think about the things that your sister says that riles you up. Also think about moments that you can recall where your sister's gotten riled up and maybe what you said, right? And you can compare what you believe riles her up to what she actually says, right? And when she hopefully shares that with you, then you can maybe avoid those things. Additionally, as you highlighted, your parents, your other siblings, and other relatives will be around. Hopefully that means that there's going to be more than just 4, 5, or 6 people, right? You said siblings, so that leads me to believe you're at least from a nuclear family of 5 people, right? But maybe it's more, and then other relatives will be there. So the more people actually provide some buffer or space. So for instance, if it's at your parents' house, as I'm alluding or assuming from what you have shared, I would talk to your parents and just make sure you and your sister aren't sitting by each other, right? That way, that side banter that happens during Thanksgiving, you usually are talking more so with the people around you than the whole table. Though, of course, sometimes the whole table, there's a discussion, but not even being close or in the vicinity of your sister will also help hopefully fix or solve this, at least for the holidays. I think, of course, a larger conversation should and needs to happen because it seems like you guys are always ruffling each other's feathers from what you've shared. And so, is there a way that we can coexist in a space that doesn't do that? Are there underlying issues we need to work through? Do we even want to work through these issues, or can we just be cordial? I think those are things to think about and consider for anyone, especially during these holidays with relatives. And oftentimes we can get into tense moments with these individuals. So that is my 2 cents on the Ask Dr. Shepherd. As always, if you want to submit an Ask Dr. Shepherd, feel free to email them to offthedataprovided@gmail.com. Once again, that is offthedataprovided@gmail.com. I will, of course, talk to you all on the next one, and I hope you all have a great holiday.